Okay, so we are going to do a social studies lesson today. And so I'm going to kind of talk you guys through what's happening in California's history using this Google slideshow I made. So we're focusing on Links to the East, which is chapter 7, lesson 1. If you are in your social studies book, it would be pages 278 through 285. So one of the things I noticed in the previous chapter we read about California becoming a state was this fact box right here. It says Californians did not learn about their statehood until October 18th, 1850. And that was, I think, about a month after they were actually a state. So they didn't even know they were part of the United States until a month later. On that day, Helen Crosby and a group of California leaders arrived in Monterey aboard the steamship Oregon. In the folds of her umbrella, she carried the official documents granting California statehood. So remember, some of the ways they had to get to, people got to California was over land, like a covered wagon, or they went by ship to the Isthmus of Panama, and then they would cross there. And then, actually, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. There's my by land, by ship. And when they went by ship by the Isthmus of Panama, that was one of our options, right? So here is what the United States of America looked like at that time. So these are all official states, the green, and then California has become a part of that. And official territories as well. So like Oregon, for example, is not a state, but it's official U.S. territory. All this white is not a part of the United States yet. So it's kind of interesting how there's like patches, and that California is kind of by itself over here, right? So if you are going to get to California, you could go by covered wagon across land. So this route, right? You could go by ship, which means one of the ways by ship would be to go all the way around the tip of South America and back up. And then this was a little bit of a shorter route here. Get away. Where it would go, you would take a ship to Panama right there, and see how it's like really skinny right there. So they figure, so I'll take a ship there, and then I'll walk across the land here, this little tiny strip, which is actually not a little tiny strip. It's not like, I mean, yeah, this is a by scale. It's a trip by land, okay? And then you would take your ship back up, a different ship back up to California. So regardless of which route you took, it was a long trip, right? So that would be like, imagine people traveling that way, but also like information had to travel that way because information had to travel with people, right? There was no phones, there was obviously no email and things like that. And there wasn't even like a postal service, right? Like there was no regular way where you could just drop off a letter somewhere and expect someone to take it back east for you. Like if you knew of someone that was traveling east, you might be like, oh, hey, can I give you some letters to take with you? Things like that. But it wasn't like you could buy a stamp and then it would find its way to the east, right? So this was a problem, right? Because people wanted to communicate with people in the East. Well, they had family and friends back there, and people in the East wanted to communicate with their family and friends that moved to California. Also, because the United States government is located in the East, and California was now a part of that, California wanted to know what's going on in the government, and they wanted to make sure that they were playing a role in that, and Californians' needs were being met. So there needed to be some better communication. So in response to that need, Congress passed the Overland Mail Act of 1857. So this act, when it says something like an act, usually it's just like a law, right? So this is a law that said that the United States would establish a mail service to California, back and forth between the East and California, so people could communicate. So how did they do that? They did that with Stagecoach. This is a stagecoach. You should probably see them in like old Western movies and things like that. So I don't know if you can see right here. It says U.S. Mail on the front. But anyways, this is a little part in the back where you would put bags of mail, right? So the plan was to have these stagecoaches go back and forth between California and the East with information, with letters, with correspondence and things like that, right? So the Overland Mail Company was created to meet this need of stagecoaches and trying to get this operation running. So this guy named John Butterfield, he's the one that started this Overland Mail Company. He's very handsome, isn't he? And the goal was twice a week, they were going to have these stagecoaches going back and forth. So twice a week, they'd have one leaving California, and then they'd have one leaving the East, and then they'd cross back to the other side. So you did have, if you wanted to send correspondence, some back between from the East to California, from California to the East, you'd have to find a location of the Overland Mail Company, drop that off, and then you could expect your letter to be taken. So the way that worked is they, I don't know if you can see right here, it says probably going to see Butterfield, right? So anyways, what he did was he created, he bought a lot of stagecoaches, right? And it's not like one team of horses and one stagecoach like nonstop going across the United States of America, right? There was several stagecoaches, and he established 200 way stations. And a way station is just like a place to stop. And it's also a way station is a place where that's where you would drop off your letters, and then they would add it to the stack, right? So they had these stopping locations because obviously the horses and the drivers needed a rest and things like that. So people were really stoked because when this happened in response to the act passed by Congress, right? And that was in 1857. So by October 10th, 1858, the Overland Mail Company had completed its first trip by stagecoach from the East to San Francisco. And when they arrived, everyone was so stoked. They're like cheering crowds. Everyone was so excited because they were able to go from Missouri to San Francisco in a record of 24 days. Doesn't seem that fast, right? So you would mail a letter, and 24 days later, it could get from Missouri to California. But, I mean, that was pretty fast considering how quickly things would travel in the past, right? So, I mean, people were pretty excited about the stagecoach and the Overland Mail Company, but they thought, there's got to be a quicker way. So that is the creation of the Pony Express. So you might have heard of the Pony Express before. The Pony Express first began on April 3rd, 1860. A guy named Johnny Fry, it's like the greatest name ever for a Pony Express guy, I think. He got on his horse in St. Joseph, Missouri, and it had in his hand a bag of mail. And his goal was to get it to Sacramento. At the same time, another guy whose name was Billy Hamilton, not as cool as Johnny Fry, but Billy's a pretty good name, right? He took off from Sacramento going east with a bag of mail also. So we have mail going west and mail going east, right? So the riders hoped to get their mail in 10 days instead of that 24 days. It wasn't a stagecoach. It was just one dude on a horse. But this guy did not do the whole trip by himself, right? It was like a relay race. So each rider would go about 75 miles before handing mail off to the next guy in the relay. Also, they would change horses every 10 or 12 miles because the horse is like running the entire time, right? Because they were trying to do this fast. So the horse would get tired. So every 10 or 12 miles, they would switch horses. So there had to be like these little, every 10 miles, there had to be a little place to stop, right? This is kind of like an old school Pony Express map, and it shows like the different stopping points. So the guy and the horse would go about 75 miles. So he'd go between about 7 different horses during that time. And then he would hand off to the next guy and he'd do the same. So they would travel, full speed or as quickly as they could. They would travel day and night. So they didn't stop to sleep because, it was a relay. So the guy that was taking it during the night, he was fresh. Maybe he took a nap during the day or something, right? And then they'd go over snow, through mountains, deserts, all that stuff you have to go through to get to California, right? Or to get back east from California. And the goal was to do it quickly. So did they do it in 10 days? No. They did it in 9 days and 23 hours. Yes. So they did. They actually did it 1 hour faster than 10 days. So everyone was really, really excited about the Pony Express and that happening. So Pony Express, super cool, right? However, it lasted fewer than 18 months. It ended on October 24th, 1861. So if it was so cool, why did it last? It was less than 2 years, right? Like a year and a half. Why didn't it last? I don't know, right? I've got this video on this slideshow, and you can go ahead and play this. I'm not going to play it right now, but the slideshow is also posted in Google Classroom. So you can go through the slideshow and play this video. It kind of takes you through the history of the Pony Express and then maybe a little bit more detail than I just did. It's a pretty interesting video. You should watch it. So why did the Pony Express end? Well, the Pony Express ended because there was this amazing new invention called the telegraph. So I pulled the direct quote from the social studies book. The Pony Express was put out of business by an even faster form of communication, the telegraph. This is like an old advertisement I found for the telegraph. So let's talk about the telegraph. So during the 1830s, so remember Pony Express ended in 1861. But during the 1830s, this guy named Samuel F.B. Morse, so this handsome devil right here, he started experimenting with sending messages using electricity along iron wires. So, trial and error, a lot of inventors, you don't get an idea and then you amazingly invent the thing right away. So he worked on this for a long time. And telegrams and telegraphs were first sent in the East Coast. The first telegraph line ran from Baltimore, Maryland to Washington, D.C. The first telegraph ever sent was sent on May 24th, 1844, and the message said, "What hath God wrought?" Sounds very Shakespearean, doesn't it? But that was the first telegraph ever sent, and it was sent between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., along lines like this. So if we want to establish a telegraph to California, guess what they were going to need to do? They were going to need to make a line like this going all the way across the country. So 1844, 1861, right? Took a long time. Let's look at how a telegraph works. So this was this is the telegraph that Morse invented. So what you would do is you would push this knob down and it would send dots and dashes. That's all, just little taps. Because what would happen is when you push this down, these two pieces of metal would touch. And I know you guys, or my class at least, didn't get quite very far at all with Mr. Turney's exploration into circuits. But when when those two metals touch, they make a closed circuit and it sends a little spurt of electricity, right? An electrical current. And so that was basically how they're communicating, by just making little bursts of electricity, right? So if you look in your social studies book, you'll see something about Morse code and how there's dots and dashes that represent letters, and they had to use those dots and dashes because those little dots and dashes are those spurts of electrical current. Okay. So then this piece right here was like a spring, so that when you push this down in these two beads, it's not like, right? So as soon as you lift your finger up, the spring would push that back up. So it would open the circuit back up, and then that would end the burst of electricity, right? Make sense? Okay. So that's kind of like how a telegraph works, right? And then it was hooked to a wire, probably somewhere. There's got to be a wire coming out of this sucker. But the wire would be connected to those long telegraph lines, and it would be like when you close that circuit, the electrical burst would go across the wire, across the country, and send a message, right? So by the 1860s, they had established telegraph lines all the way to California. So on October 24th, 1861, a guy named Stephen J. Field sent a message from California to the president of the United States at that time, who was Abraham Lincoln. And he sent him a message. The message said, "The Pacific to the Atlantic sends greetings." I like little information like that, right? Like, what was the first telegraph they sent? This is a little political cartoon I found that I thought was interesting. It's like the two sides of the country shaking hands with the electricity in the background, and it's kind of showing how the telegraph kind of bridged the communication between the East Coast and the West Coast. So then, like, I mean, the Pony Express, it would take 10 days, but you could get a message across the country by telegraph, like instantaneously, practically, right? So that would be the preferred way to communicate, because people don't want to wait 10 days. So I also have this amazing video at the end of my slideshow. So there's the one about Pony Express, and then there's this video at the end that I recommend you watch. It's about Morse code. So Morse code is obviously named after Samuel Morse, because he invented the telegraph, and thus he also invented this code that had to be used to communicate with. So you should definitely watch this video about Morse code. And yeah, I hope that was informative for you. I was kind of summarizing what's going on in the social studies book, chapter 7, lesson 1. So tomorrow your job is going to be just to read through those pages, and they should make sense, because you're going to read about all the stuff I just told you. So I would love for you to like my video. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to be a YouTuber, because I made all these YouTube videos now. All right, I'm signing off, y'all. Maybe if I can find the button. I lost my button. There it is. All right, now for reals, I'm signing off.